The major difference between moods and motivation is that where the latter are, so to speak, vectorial qualities, the former are merely scalar. Motives are a directional cast. They describe a certain overall course, gravitate towards certain, usually temporary, consummations. But moods vary only as to intensity. They go nowhere. They spring from certain circumstances, but they are responsive to no ends. Like fogs, they just settle and lift. Like scents suffuse and evaporate. When present, they are totalistic. If one is sad, everything and everybody seems dreary. If one is gay, everything and everybody seems splendid. Thus, though a man can be vain, brave, willful, and independent at the same time, he can very well be playful and listless, or exultant and melancholy at the same time. Further, where motivates persist for more or less extended periods of time, moods merely recur with greater or lesser frequency, coming and going for what are often quite unfathomable reasons. But perhaps the most important difference, so far as we are concerned, between moods and motivations is that motivations are made meaningful with reference to ends toward which they are conceived to conduce, whereas moods are made meaningful with reference to the conditions from which they are conceived to spring. We interpret motives in terms of their consummations, but we interpret moods in terms of their sources. We say that a person is industrious because he wishes to succeed. We say that a person is worried because he is conscious of the hanging threat of nuclear holocaust. And this is no less the case when the interpretations are ultimate. Charity becomes Christian charity when it is enclosed in a conception of God's purposes. Optimism in Christian optimism when it is grounded in particular conception of God's nature. The assiduity of the Navajo finds is rational in a belief that since reality operates mechanically, it is coercible. Their chronic fearfulness finds its rationale in a conviction that, however reality operates, it is both enormously powerful and terribly dangerous. By formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and that the symbols or symbol systems which induce the defined dispositions we set off as religious and those which place to those dispositions in a cosmic framework are the same symbols out to occasion to surprise. For what else do we mean by saying that a particular mood of awe is religious and not secular, except that it springs from entertaining a conception of all-pervading vitality like manna and not from a visit to the Grand Canyon? Or that particular case of asceticism is an example of a religious motivation, except that it is direct toward the achievement of an unconditioned and like nirvana, and not a conditioned one like weight reduction. If sacred symbols did not at one and the same time induce dispositions in human beings and formulate, however, obliquely, inarticulately, or unsystematically general ideas of order, then the empirical differentia of religious activity or religious experience will not exist. A man can indeed be said to be religious about golf, but not merely if he pursues it with passion and plays it on Sundays. We must also see it as symbolic of some transcendent truth. And the pubescent boy gazing soulfully into the eyes of the pubescent girl in William Steig cartoon and murmuring, "There is something about you, Ethel, which gives me a sort of religious feelings." It's like most obsolescence confused. It's like adolescents confused. What any particular religion affirms about the fundamental nature of reality may be obscure, shallow, or all too often perverse, but it must, if it is not consist of the mere collections of received practices and conventional sentiments we usually refer to as moralism, affirms something. If one were to essay a minimal definition of religion today, it would perhaps not be Taylor's famous belief in spiritual beings, to which Godey, wearing a theoretical subtleties, has lately urged us to return, but rather what Salvador de Madariaga has called the relatively modest dogma of that God is not mad. Usually, of course, religion affirms very much more than this. We believe, as James remarked, all that we can and will believe everything in we only could. The thing we seem least able to tolerate is a threat to our powers of conception, a suggestion that our ability to create, grasp, and use symbols may fail us. For were this to happen, we will be more helpless. As I have already pointed out, that the beavers, the extreme generality, diffuseness, and variability of man's innate, that is, genetically programmed response capacities, means that without the assistance of cultural patterns, he would be functionally incomplete. Not merely a talent ape who had, like some underprivileged child, unfortunately been prevented from realizing his full potentialities, but a kind of formless monster with neither sense of direction nor power or self-control, a chaos of spasmodic impulses and vague emotions. Man depends upon symbols and symbol systems with a dependence so great as to be decisive from his creatural viability, and as a result, his sensitivity to even the remotest indication that they may prove unable to cope with one or another aspect of experience raises within him the gravest sort of anxiety. Man can adapt itself in himself somehow to anything his imagination can cope with, but he cannot deal with chaos, because his characteristic function and highest asset is conception. His great thing is to meet what we cannot construe, the uncanny, and it is popularly called. It need not be a new object. We do meet new things and understand them promptly, if tentatively by the nearest analogy. When our minds are functioning freely but under mental stress, even perfectly familiar things may become suddenly disorganized and give us the horrors. Therefore, our most important assets are always the symbols of our general orientation in nature. On the earth, in society and in what we are doing. The symbols of our Weltanschauung and Lebensanschauung. Consequently, in a private society, a daily ritual is incorporated in common activities, in eating, washing, fire making, etc., as well as in pure ceremonial, because the need of reassuring the tribal morale and recognizing its cosmic condition is constantly felt. In Christian Europe, the Church brought men daily, in some orders even hourly, to their knees, no act if not to complete their ascent to the ultimate concepts. There are at least 3 points where chaos and tumult or events which lack not just interpretations but interpretability threatens to break upon man at the limits of his analytic capacities, at the limits of his powers of endurance, and at the limits of his moral insights. Bereavement, suffering, and a sense of intricable ethical paradox are all, if they become intense enough or are sustained long enough, radical challenges to the proposition that life is comprehensible and that we can, by taking thoughts, orient ourselves effectively within it. Challenges with which any religion, however primitive, which hopes to persist, must attempt somehow to cope. Of the 3 issues, it is the first which has been least investigated by modern social anthropologists, though Evans, Pritchard, classic discussions of why granaries fall on some ascend and not on others is a notable exception. Even to consider people's religious beliefs as attempts to bring anomalous events or experience, death, dreams, mental fugues, volcanic eruptions, or marital infidelity, within the circle of at least potentially explicable sensuous snack of Tellurianism or worse. But it does appear to be a fact that at least some men, in all probability most men, are unable to leave unclarified problems of analysis merely unclarified, just to look at the stranger features of the world's landscape in dumb astonishment or blind apathy without trying to develop, however fantastic, inconscient, or simple-minded, some notion as to how much features might be reconciled with the more ordinary deliverance of experience. Any chronic failure of one's explanatory apparatus, the complex of receiving culture patterns, common sense, science, philosophical speculation, myth, one has for mapping the empirical world to explain things which cry out for explanation, tends to lead to a deep disquiet, a tendency rather more widespread, and a disquiet rather deeper than we have sometimes supposed, since the pseudoscience view of religious beliefs was quite rightfully deposed. After all, even that high priest of heroic atheism, Lord Russell, once remarked that although the problems of the existence of God had never bothered him, the ambiguity of certain mathematical axioms had threatened to unhang his mind. And Einstein's profound dissatisfaction with quantum mechanics has based on a surely religious inability to believe that, as he put it, God plays dice with the universe. But this quest for ludicity and the rush of metaphysical anxiety that occurs when empirical phenomena threaten to remain intrinsically intransigently opaque is found on much humbler intellectual levels. Certainly I was struck in my own work much more than I had at all expected to be, by the degree to which my more animalistically inclined informants behaved like true Taylorians. They seemed to be constantly using their beliefs to explain phenomena, or more accurately, to convince themselves that the phenomena were explainable within the accepted scheme of things, for they commonly had only a minimal attachment to the particular soul possession, emotional disequilibrium, taboo infringement, or bewitchment hypothesis they advanced, and were all too ready to abandon it for some other. In the same genre, which struck them as more plausible given the facts of the case. What they were not ready to do was abandon it for no other hypothesis at all, to leave events to themselves. And what is more, they adopted this nervous cognitive stance with respect to phenomena which had to immediate practical bearing on their own lives, or for that matter, or on anyone's. When a peculiarly shaped, rather large toadstool grew up in a carpenter's house in the short space of a few days, or some say a few hours. People came from miles around to see it, and everyone had some sort of explanation. Some animists, some animatists, some not quite either for it. Yet it would be hard to argue that the toadstool had any social value in Radcliffe Brown's sense, or was connected in any way with anything which did and for which it could have been standing proxy, like the Andaman cicada. Toadstools play about the same role in Javanese life as they do in ours. And in the ordinary course of things, Javanese have about as much interest in them as we do. It was just that this one has odd, strange, uncanny name, and the odd, strange, and uncanny simply must be accounted for, or again, the conviction that it could be accounted for sustained. One does not shrug off a toadstool which grows 5 times as fast as a toadstool has any right to grow. In the broadest sense, the strange toadstool did have implications, and critical ones, for those who heard about it. It threatened their most general ability to understand the world, raised the uncomfortable question of whether the beliefs which they held about nature were workable, the standards of truth they used valid. Nor is this no arg that it is only or even mainly sudden eruptions of extraordinary events which engendered in man the disquieting sense that his cognitive resources might prove unavailing, or that this intuition appears only in its acute form. More commonly, it is a persistent, constantly re-experienced difficulty in grasping certain aspects of nature, self, and society, in bringing certain elusive phenomena within the sphere of culturally formulatable fact, which renders many chronically uneasy, and toward which a more equable flow of diagnostic symbols is consequently directed. It is what lies beyond a relatively fixed frontiers of accredited knowledge that looming as a constant background to the daily round of practical life sets ordinary human experience in a permanent context of metaphysical concern and raises the dim back of the mind suspicious that one may adrift in an arbus world